top performers are 3 times more likely to keep pursuing deals after rejection than average performers. There was some research done by the Rain Group that showed that resilience really isn't just a trait, a nice to have. It's actually a performance differentiator. And it comes down to staying in the game and not giving up.
Hey, welcome to the Sales Squad Pod, the show that breaks down the skills sellers need to crush quota and advance their career. Hosted by Lisa, a top enterprise AE, Sarita, a frontline leader, and Donna, a former leader of leaders. We met in the sales trenches at Salesforce. We're moms, we've carried a bag for decades, we've gone to club, and we've got you. If you're ready to up-level your game and career, let's jump into it.
Welcome back, Sales Squad Pod. It's me, Donna Lynn, your host, with Sarita and Lisa, and we are here to talk about a really important topic in today's challenging sales environment. We're going to talk about resiliency in sales. I think mental fortitude is absolutely mandatory in our profession, and right now in today's selling environment, it is needed more than ever. So today's episode is for sellers or leaders who ever find themselves on the struggle bus, and let's face it, that's probably going to be every single one of us. And today we are unpacking what research tells us about stress, rejection, and performance, why resilience actually matters more in sales than many other professions, and how the best sellers are staying mentally strong and how they're pushing through and hitting their numbers regardless of what's getting in their way. There was a well-known study done by CareerCast, and they looked at hundreds of professions based on factors like pressure, deadlines, competition, public scrutiny. And guess what? Sales managers are among the 10 most stressful jobs out there.
Honestly, I'm not surprised at all. I feel like sales is one of the only careers where your performance is publicly measured. Every single month, every single day, arguably, and every single quarter. You miss a number, everybody knows. You hit your number, everybody knows. That's a unique type of pressure. I must admit, I thrive in these types of environments. And by the way, as we were laughing at earlier, certainly a glass of wine definitely helps for this piece because I need that in order to get through those day-to-days.
It sounds like you're an adrenaline junkie, Sarita, if you're loving the stress so much.
I do think that sales is the most high risk, high reward type of job out there. When I start to see my name dropping, I find it the biggest motivator. And so I think it also depends on what motivates somebody.
Look, I know that there are elements of our role that are stressful. I absolutely have had stressful moments. But to say that our jobs are among the most stressful in the entire world, that just seems a bit much. Honestly, the thing that keeps me grounded is we are not curing cancer. Lives are not on the lines. Well, maybe depending on what kind of software you sell, maybe. So for me, it's about perspective.
I don't find the job stressful. I used to. Sarita was on my first team when I started SaaS selling. And I think Sarita, she's laughing. I think that she would say, yes, Lisa was a stress case. I was freaking out every day on that job. Over time, that had changed. I've been in sales a long time. But to your point, Donna, I used to work in a children's hospital. And it just puts things into perspective. I used to sell pharmaceuticals, and I would get a phone call on a Friday night. Someone would say, we don't have enough formula for the NICU. And if this baby does not eat, this baby is not going to make it. That definitely puts things into perspective. I just feel like coming into SaaS sales specifically, it's really not that high stakes.
When I tell people I'm in sales, I often get the reaction, oh, I could never do that. And I think what drives that reaction, that knee-jerk reaction for anyone who is not in our profession, is that a lot of people do find facing rejection the most stressful part of selling. And that is the reality of what we do. The average B2B deal actually requires 6 to 10 touches before we get meaningful engagement. Meaning 6 to 10 times we get ghosted, we get told no, and we have to keep going. And 90% of our outreach is resulting in rejection or no response. So we as salespeople face these micro rejections day in and day out. I will never forget when I first started in sales and I would just get a response to a cold email, a highly researched cold email, that would make my day. And all it was a reaction. Just tell me you are out there and reacting to what I'm putting out there. that to me was a win. And so the bar is low for some of us. What was interesting when I was doing some research on why do we find rejection so difficult and so stressful, there was research done out of UCLA that actually showed that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. So when a prospect is saying no to you, your brain is processing it similarly to the way it would process pain. I think we must all have a high pain tolerance or something. But I'm curious, ladies, how do you handle rejection? And maybe how do you process it differently at work, maybe differently than you would in your personal life?
I definitely process it different at work than I do at home. 100%. At work, if I get rejection, a lot of the times I just let it roll off my back. I've been rejected so many times in work that it honestly, it doesn't really bother me. But what I would say is I also have that same response for when I win. It's like, oh, I won, it's a check mark, and I continue to move. So I just feel like with rejection at work, it's very different. If I'm rejected outside of work, I feel like that's shrouded in like shame and all of the other things that come with being rejected. But when it comes to work, just in sales, it happens so often. I think for me, a really good saying that helped shape my SaaS selling was fail fast. And that just changed perspectives for me to say a no quickly is better than somebody who I think is going to say yes for months and then says no. So I just want to hear that no as soon as possible. And then when I hear no, I'm going to listen for it 3 more times because I don't think an initial no is always a no.
Absolutely. I actually think that sales really builds like that unique emotional muscle, essentially, because rejection in sales is not occasional. Like this thing happens every day, maybe every hour. If you're a BDR or an SDR, maybe every 5 minutes, every single call you're trying to put in place. You send an email, silence, right? You run a great demo, they then go with a competitor. You spend 6 months on a deal and then procurement kills it. Who knows? There are so many ways that we get rejected in sales. And in my opinion, you have 2 choices. You're either going to carry it with you or you're going to say, all right, that didn't work. Let's dust off and let's just keep it moving. And of course, I have other coping strategies, going for a walk, right? Doing a workout. And again, this is going to make me sound like this wino, but a glass of wine definitely helps to kind of keep pushing through. But here we are. You all know me. You know my stance when it comes to red wine.
Maybe we should cut that part out, Sarita. I mean, no judgment, but I think for me, handling rejection is really easy when I separate myself from the process. Meaning, when I'm selling software and someone rejects that product, it's very easy for me to say, okay, that was not the right solution to the problem you are having. And that's okay. I don't want you to buy something you don't need. However, I will say I am now in a different role. I run my own business now. And the product I'm selling is training and speaking. And it is a product of my brain. So if you reject my product, it's far more personal to me now. And I'm struggling with that in moments. And I have to remind myself that it is still a product. And yes, it came from my brain. But just because you are not interested in that product doesn't mean you are not interested in me as a person. Mm-hmm. It's just my product doesn't fill a gap that you have in your business right now. But reminding ourselves and separating us as people from the product, I think is really integral to handling rejection. And resilience and this ability to push through is so important in sales. And it's what sets people apart as top performers versus middle of the pack. And top performers are 3 times more likely to keep pursuing deals after rejection than average performers. There was some research done by the Rain Group that showed that resilience really isn't just a trait, a nice to have. It's actually a performance differentiator. And it comes down to staying in the game and not giving up. And it reminds me of one of my favorite books that I read by Angela Duckworth called Grit. It's about perseverance and passion over the long term. and how that is actually a stronger predictor of success than talent. And it shows up so often in sales. Top performers aren't necessarily the most talented, the most articulate, the most gifted. They're the ones that don't give up and they stay in the game. And I know myself, I often, when I'm hiring account executives or leaders, I am looking for grit. Sarita, I'm curious if you're the same. Is that an attribute you're looking for?
Absolutely. In fact, I would say grit is probably one of the most important things I look for when hiring sellers, because talent, of course, is great, but without the resilience component of this, then they're not going to survive long in a sales environment, especially in the SaaS sales environment that we live and work in every day today. The best sellers are the ones who continuously follow up. They keep learning, they keep showing up. Even after the really difficult months or quarters, they understand that this whole thing is a long game, and grit is what sets those people apart and keeps them in the long game long enough to see their success. I do want to say something that maybe doesn't talked about openly enough. And I would say for underrepresented sellers and leaders, this resilience requirement can be, in my opinion, even higher, because you're not just navigating the standard quota pressure, rejection, the tough quarters and the tough months. You're also navigating being the only person in the room, feeling like you have to prove yourself twice potentially, and carrying maybe expectations that other people typically don't see.
I read this. It was a person who was saying if they had to choose between that scrappy person versus the silver spoon, the scrappier person is going to be not only more resilient, but think through things at a different angle and just bring so much more to the roles, and they just outperform more often. And I think that really speaks to it. I would always hire the person who has had to fight, because you know they're not going to go down without a fight, and you know that they're just always going to get back up.
100%. And I think if anyone has the joy of being in an interview with me, some of my favorite interview questions are all about trying to assess a candidate's level of grittiness and scrappiness. And I will ask about times they've failed. And what I'm listening for is that perseverance and going against all odds, and that ability to not give up and have an unwavering belief in themselves. That is what I want to hear. And I think perhaps that's a bias, because I believe I have that in myself, in my own story. And so as a result, I do know how that upbringing that I've had has contributed to my grittiness and willingness to go above and beyond. When I first took on a role as AE at Salesforce, my territory was, I don't want to say bad. There's no such thing as a bad territory. But I came in at the end of Q3. And so I had a territory that wasn't necessarily the healthiest with respects to existing pipeline. And I looked at my account list, and one of the accounts literally in the notes in the CRM said, oh, this customer is a Microsoft testimonial customer. Basically read between the lines, they're probably not going to buy with us, so move along. And they were a prospect. But here's the thing. I love finding a diamond in the rough. That is something that I have built a career on. And so I didn't let that dissuade me. And I kept calling into that account. And it turned into be the largest deal that we had in the region that year. Because I didn't let a little note that said, don't bother, we've already tried, there's nothing here. I didn't let that stop me. I'm curious if either of you have tips on how to demonstrate you are gritty when going for that next job or going for the promotion. How do you demonstrate that to someone who doesn't know you?
Oh, I like this question. The first no isn't necessarily a no. It could potentially lead into a no, not now. I had a candidate that had applied for a role. What I loved about this person was it was a no, but what can I appreciate about them was that they followed up with me pretty consistently after that to best understand, first of all, why, what happened. Was it something they had done that made it a no? And what can they do in the future in order to solidify the yes? And just from the follow up, the emails, and the calls and conversations that we had, I actually realized that I should have hired this person in the first place. And so in the next cycle, when I had the opportunity to hire, I immediately put this person back into the cycle to be able to hire them. But the key thing for me was the resilience showed through them understanding that Perhaps I just need to get some feedback to understand where I went wrong in order for me to course correct and rectify for next time. If you're doing that in an interview, I know that you're going to be doing that in a sales cycle as well.
100%. The way that you act in a interview process reflects how you would handle a deal cycle. When you get a no from a customer, do you continue to foster a relationship or do you disappear?
I actually didn't get a job one time. I walked out of that interview thinking I crushed that interview. And then I got the no. And I was shocked. And they said everything that you did was right. They ended up hiring a woman who spoke French. But they did say, I do believe a role is going to be coming up in Ontario. And I got hired a couple of months after she did. And this is not a me versus her situation, but I had something to prove when I went into that role. And I crushed that year. So when it came down to who was at the top of the list, like that motivation for me to prove to this person that he had made the wrong decision was everything. And the person who did hire me, I remember when we were doing awards, he was just sitting back in his seat and he was like, I'm so proud of you because I had a chip on my shoulder. I was really upset that he didn't hire me, but I proved it over and over and over again that he made the wrong choice.
I love that. So there's a few things that I think about when it comes to building resilience and persevering through difficult times. So number one, for me, I have always tried to acknowledge the effort that my team is putting in and not just focus on the outcome. Because there's so many elements within a deal cycle that we simply can't control. You know, does the customer have budget right now? What's the competition doing? Versus the inputs that we are putting in to prepare for those conversations, the questions we're asking during our discovery, our persistence, our follow-up. Are we doing the things that we say we are doing? To me, it's incredibly important to acknowledge that effort from the team.
When I have a month that I didn't perform the best, as long as you can point to the inputs that you have done so that you are building, you are in a building stage for the next quarter, for the next month, I think that should be acknowledged because a lot of the times we're not on a month-to-month quota anyways. We might be on a yearly quota. The more senior you go, the more upmarket that you start to sell to. These sales cycles take a long time. And so no, I might not hit every month, but you will for sure see the efforts. And I would expect to be recognized for those efforts and those deposits that I'm putting into those deals, because when it closes, it might take the quota for the whole year.
Yeah. I was coaching a client who was previously working in the mid-market space as a leader and then went to become an enterprise seller. And she was really struggling because she was used to a cadence where deals were closing every day, every week, every month, and went from that to year or multi-year long deal cycles. And she was really struggling to feel accomplished and feel like she was making a difference. So what we talked about was changing the yardstick in which she was measuring things. So instead of closed ACV, we were looking at how many new contacts are you getting in a month? How many meetings are you booking face to face? How much revenue is coming from pipeline that you have sourced yourself versus organic growth that was going to happen with or without you? Those are things that you can control, and focusing on measuring that level of effort, I think, was really helpful for her.
I would say that one of the mistakes I see so often with people stepping into leadership for the first time, especially in the small business or mid-market space, is like only measuring success by closed deals. And yes, we are very blessed in that typically, yes, in the small business and mid-market space, we are a velocity region. But if you do that, it's also going to make people feel like they could be failing a lot of the time if they are not closing every single day or every single week. So be sure to point to things like skill improvement. This is a big one because these are the things that are eventually going to lead to revenue. So focus as a coaching perspective, make sure that if you're only celebrating the win at the end, you're going to miss the 101 things that led into actually creating the win at the end.
Yeah, I love all those tips. I think the second thing for me is about the recovery period that you allow yourself. So I love, Sarita, you said earlier, you go for a walk, you have your glass of wine, And I think the key is about dusting yourself off, but quickly. Because top sellers don't carry their rejection into the next week, the next month, the next quarter. They deal with it, they accept that rejection, and they move on. Are you guys good at that?
Yeah, I am. I grew up playing competitive softball. You have a terrible at bat. That doesn't mean you take it out on the field. Now everything is going to be terrible. You can't take it to the next at bat. It's you dust it off and you go back out there and you start again.
Yeah, and I love that analogy, and I think it leads to my next point, which is we have to normalize tough quarters, tough deals, losses. In baseball, you have to normalize the fact that you are going to miss far more than you will hit.
If you're batting 300, that is amazingly successful, which is actually terrible. You're hitting ball one every 3 times. The reason why we have a 3x pipe gen is it is anticipated that 2/3 of the deals we are going to lose. So when you lose a deal and you're like, I can't believe I lost it, I'm so down on myself. Like it was it's supposed to happen.
Yeah, exactly. That is part of the gig. We know that we're going to fail, but we're going to have a win, and then we're going to fail again, and we're going to have a win. And being able to just normalize the ups and downs, I think, helps with coping and pushing through. And I think leaders actually have a very important role to play in building this culture of accepting tough quarters, dusting ourselves off, and continuing forward. Sarita, how do you create that culture within your team to persevere despite the tough quarters?
I do think that, the notion of getting over it quickly is a big piece of this, but I do want to say that there is a component of it in actually sitting in the pain as well. You'd also need to learn from the mistakes that happened in a particular sales cycle, that I think it's important to acknowledge and call out that, yes, I acknowledge what happened here. I acknowledge where we potentially went wrong or what happened is a big piece of this. So I just wanted to make sure to call that out before I jump into how I instill this in my team. As a leader, I try to constantly remind my team of one simple truth. One deal is never going to define your entire career. And sales is really a long series of, let's call it at-bats, since we're in the batting mode here. My job as a leader is to really help people stay focused on the process and to really keep perspective during those tough months. Because what happens is when people start to panic, that's when performance really drops even more. So I make sure to stabilize the environment as a leader, and that's where I think the instilling comes into place, because they need to understand that I'm not panicking. And if I'm not panicking, then you certainly should not be panicking either. Let's get on to the next one, and we're going to do it together.
Yeah, and we talked about that in the executive presence episode, Sarita, about leaders need to be even keel. I should not know that you just lost a big deal and just got off the phone with the customer who rejected you. You need to be able to demonstrate calm under pressure and that ability to persevere regardless of what you are facing. And that, I think, is what sets leaders apart and sellers apart. The last thing I will say is we all need to surround ourselves with good people. We have to find our tribe. And these are the people that are going to get us through when things are not going our way. And I have had great people around me throughout my career, people that I can call on when I have had the worst day, and also those who will celebrate me when I have the great day.
Yeah, I definitely have pods of like salespeople who understand. It's one thing to tell my husband who is like, oh, babe, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But like, he doesn't know the inputs, you know? Yeah, he doesn't get it. But it's always really good to have just other people in sales who do get it.
At the end of the day, sales is not a solo sport. So once you understand that the best sellers are the ones that have the people that they can lean on, of course, your colleagues, your mentors, your friends outside of work, and sometimes just those people who are going to kindly remind you that life is bigger than this pipeline that you're chasing. Because when you're in that deep quarter, everything feels intense. You need somebody who can say, listen, just take a breath, Sarita. Here's your glass of wine.
Your HR department may be contacting you after this, Sarita.
Yeah, I think they're aware.
Ladies, I think this is a great time to just recap what we talked about. Sales is a stressful profession, and research confirms this. And the reality is there are things that we can do to push through and remain resilient and ride that roller coaster and enjoy the highs and ride through those lows. We talked about tips for separating effort from the outcome, making sure that we are recovering quickly, accepting that tough quarters are actually a very normal part of the business, and lastly, surrounding ourselves with the right people. And if there's one idea that you leave with today, it is in sales, the winners aren't the ones who never hear the word no. They're just the ones who continue to show up after they do. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this episode, I think you'll also enjoy our episode on systems and habits and a couple newsletters that I've also written on this topic. We'll put it all in the show notes. As always, we're excited for you to listen in next week.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Sales Squad Pod. We're building a community of serious sellers and leaders who want to operate at the next level, and we're glad you're part of it. If you found value in today's conversation, we would love to hear from you. Send us questions you'd like us to tackle in future episodes, and whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify, be sure to hit like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube at Sales Squad Pod.